you don't want around anymore. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. You've been before that you don't want around anymore. People you've been before that you don't want around. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. The thing that made me know that what I had to do was right was, of course, the Bible. The Bible before I knew what the Bible was, if I even knew what the word was for a book. I must have been only 2 or 3. But there it was, my grounding memory every night. Had it been 100 at that point, maybe only a dozen, as slimly as one can truly document such distant, almost imaginary recollection. We gathered around grandfather's knee, the fire stoked or not, but the warmth and smell of the hearth, of ash and wood smoke. And we'd listen to him read. What I didn't know yet was preaching, each turning of the page seeming to give his very fingers an electrical governance to power his raised and lowering voice in its lilted southern cadence. The other thing that made me know that I had to write was, I think, the western wind. It never failed to shake something in me at unexpected times. It took me out of any reverie and reminded me that I was alive, and while I was alive, I should mark the events somehow. At first, just a diary. I wish I had them still. I fantasized that I was channeling the great beyond. God, I wouldn't dare to say this, but as we were following a prophet, I didn't think it so strange. I thought that's what writing was, in a way. My only reference being the good book. Then I started telling stories. Stories that would send me into a shiver late at night, forbidden ones that I would tear into pieces sometimes for fear that they would be discovered. What gave me that permission? But after a while, I learned to lean into what I would learn was metaphor, into fable, into symbolic decree. The hidden arts. That helped me understand the Bible better and imagine the men, and hopefully women, who shaped the tale of what had been the Lord and Savior. When was it that it got in my system? Was the urge always there? Did it seed itself with my grandfather's voice as a good thing? Maybe. Or was it somewhere out there, carried like a willow seed, when the wind made me feel like I wanted to fling myself into the canyon, to fly ever so briefly, and terrify myself by the prospect of my body careening off the red rocks until I lay limp, awaiting what could only be my damnation. I thought of those times sharply, when, after it happened, when he lay me down, my back feeling itself repeatedly bruised by the rugged stones of that darkened London alley. What was this? Was I having an epileptic fit? I remember each and every spasm because I heard myself narrating the event aloud, as if it would be my last bit of writing, the only thing I really savored in terms of prayer, my only contribution to this immortal life. Little did I know how right I was. Perhaps it was this prayer that did it, as words are prayer and prayers are merely words. Had I sinned? Is that why it had happened? Not, as he explained to me, the thirst for immortality, but beckoning the bite itself. Wasn't I, on a mission, supposed to guide them towards the Lord? And did I mistake my sister missionaries and their boisterous pink-cheeked smiles? The subtle tilt in their hips? Had I brought shame to my family? But now, words or prayer, the words just aren't the same. I want to write like the wind blows with little to no attachment, seeding free and indiscriminately. I stayed in England. When I had healed some, my neck wrapped in a thick woolen scarf, I told the girls when it was time to relay the message to my family. They were in tears. Already, their emotions started to feel distant. I hadn't thought they cared about me, not in a real sense, only in a spiritual sense, shame for me to say. I don't know. Maybe they did. The one who, in a way, took my past from me, gave me this uncertain future. I did somehow love him, like the wind. And like the wind, he didn't stay long, and he hasn't returned. I took over his attic apartment. He had a coffin, but I wasn't ready for that. I carried up 3 flights of stairs an old steel Chase Lounge garden chair I found, and fashioned a mattress out of some pillows I purchased with the money I had left. It seemed the apartment did belong to him, for no one came to disturb me, not once, for many a year, for more than I cared to realize, as I slept, dozed, dreamed, cried, and mourned my inability to write, which was almost nearer to me than my own family. The words that had come from my grandfather's mouth before I knew them as the word of God, when I simply knew them as the strand, the thing that guides us forward with little more sense than the whistling wind. So, for most, I slept, realizing full well in time that I could eat less than nothing to survive, locking myself away from the smell of human beings which, when I would occasionally go outside, would make me feel like when I wanted to fling myself into the canyon, an abandon of all good sense, a desire to prove or disprove God's existence, a folly that lived in my belly and always threatened to get out. When did I begin to doubt? Had I always? Was my original sin too great for this world? All I can do is make myself like a blank page and welcome the careful placement of words I feel. First, my neck, where he bit me, since healed. Then down my back, counting the bruises like the stones. My heart. My Heartstone is the one thing that will not age. When I awoke and ascertained that it was sometime before what would become the First World War, not that I knew at the time, or could tell it was coming even, I came somewhat dimly to the conclusion that although I didn't feel I could write, I most likely could still read. All money, saved or found, was spent on books. And I collected so many odd and moldy volumes that I used them as additional insulation. Not that being cold was an issue. I left only a small window by my chase so that I could read by the light of day, and at night, for a change, I would sometimes venture out and read by the light of a nearby gas lamp, perhaps welcoming the attention of a predator, giving me some excuse to, well, alleviate my curiosity. But it never came. I simply read, and read a lot. And as I read, I found familiar pains again. And with those pains, I began to locate what would become something like my very own voice. A nagging voice at first, an urgent voice, if I believed in myself, an insipid voice if not, a voice that cowered in the presence of other writers, sometimes merely the cadence of a shopkeep's voice, how the British commanded their speech like they'd been given a character in a play, you know? Did I know who I was, even? Yes. No. I did not know who I was. I did not know who I was outside of the church, outside of my family's rigid embrace, outside of the legends and the myths and the rigid makings of God and his resurrected Son. But I too had been resurrected. And why did I not believe that I was evil?
A little sin is better than a big one.
That's what Pa said when I caught him smoking. His shame frightened me. It was the first time I saw him as something other than my elder, my father, the one who was in closer contact with God than I would ever be, or so it was told. His phrase looped in my thoughts when I felt the urge. But what sin? On my darkest days, it was trying to convince me that should I let the dark spirit inhabit me, maybe when one less innocent was in my clutches, that it would save more innocence in time. Madness. What insanity to take that which is only God's domain, innocence and guilt. Nothing really helped but to let it pass. I couldn't read in those moments. I walked by the Thames and fantasized about throwing myself in. If I had a few coins, I'd order a pint and drink a quart of it before wanting to retch. Some sins I could easily abstain from. I had a friend once for what might have been a year. He was blind and aged. I never would have thought to speak to him, but he spoke to me first.
Are those books you're carrying, young lady?
He would often sit outside the back alley of a pub I would walk by on my way from my favorite bookshop.
Excuse me, sir?
He pointed with his cane. The head had something that looked like a dog or a dragon or some combination of the two. He wasn't dressed like he was going through hard times, but neither were his clothes that of a gentleman. His coat was a dark woolen kind, and he unexpectedly wore sandals, like I'd maybe only seen in a play back home when they would reenact the Nativity with the Romans. His feet were quite clean and well-groomed.
Yes, sir.
He pointed with his offhand to his nose and laughed.
I can smell them. I don't mean to frighten you, dear. I'm blind, you see. I've been for some time, but that gives me quite the sense of smell. I won't be so indecent to say, but I've noticed you passing here many times. And I think now I can place that you must be holding some books, some very old books, no? How many are you holding, if you don't mind me asking?
I took him at his word that he was blind, but as I got closer, I noticed his eyes were indeed clouded over. He seemed harmless enough, despite his foreign accent. I looked around us, without any good cause to do so, and stepped closer to him. We were alone. The last pub would be closing soon.
I've, 5. So this one is just a small pamphlet, really, a local poet. The bookseller gave it to me because I go there so often.
May I see?
I extended one of the books to him, and he took my wrist, but only for a moment, and his trepidation made me feel safe with him. I'll admit I hadn't had anyone touch me tenderly since, since Mother was still around, and it gave me a hollow hurt. He took the book and smelled it.
Ah, yes, I can smell the ink. This is a very old book, no?
That's funny. No, it's not. It's a relatively recent edition of Hamlet by William Shakespeare, but the binding, or cover, rather, is leather, and that is actually more than 400 years old. Actually, the bookkeep did it. Gave it to me as a gift.
The aged figure took in my words. I saw his profile as he seemed to look down the alley, but I soon realized he was listening. His ear must be quite sharp. All I could hear was the distant wagon thrum of the city, neither alarming nor interesting.
I don't hear that many like myself that are not from around here, are you not, young lady?
No, I'm from America, from the West. I came here a few years ago and just stayed, I guess.
And you like London town?
I like it all right. I miss the desert and the mountains. I miss hearing, I don't know. I'm not quite ready to go back. How about yourself, sir?
Oh, well. Where I come from doesn't exist anymore, and as I am blind, I won't see it anyway, so I have been here for some time. I like the weather. I will wish you good night, young one. Perhaps you will say hello again next time. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Yes, sir. Likewise, sir. Have a good night.
Naturally, he couldn't see my eyes, and his were like a fog, like a silkworm's weave. But he looked in my direction anyway, and I waved, out of nervous habit.
I'm sick of this life.
We had spent many a night in each other's company by the time I said this, shocking even to my own ear. A second before, I was going to ask him if he was sick of living, but caught myself that wasn't a very kind thing to ask an aged person. And then I was going to say I'm sick of living, but that was not a kind thing to impart on someone either, so this is what came out.
Tell me more, child.
There was enough of a pause then for us to watch a couple roughhousing teenagers come down the alley. At one point, they caught our sight, but when they met my gaze and then the old man's, they were frightened much quicker towards their intended destination. Sorry, I don't know why I said that.
Perhaps it is time for you to go home. If I could go home, if I could see my home, I think it would solve or would have solved many things in my life.
I don't know.
If it's money you need, perhaps I could help you with that.
No, I couldn't accept that, but it's not just money.
I was, as you say, sick of life for much of my time on this earth, you know. I try not to think too much of those years.
It was rare for my friend to get up, but he did so occasionally when we were together. He didn't have too much trouble with it. He walked across to the other side of the alley, tapped it with his cane, and then turned back, finally returning to sit.
Intelligence.
He pointed to my books. Somehow he was never off by more than a few inches. I imagined his head was like a big web in which things that mattered to him caught themselves. But then again, I didn't know how blind he was. I only assumed.
It is like an illness. For some. Not that I begrudge you reading, and I support it. You've been so kind to read to me. You will think me silly for saying so. What I mean is, intelligence without expression is like a boat without a place to sail. You get what some sailors have described as Lagerkoller in German. In English it is cabin fever. Of course, they are describing the folly that arises with men at sea, sometimes killing each other, sometimes eating each other, and that is not what is your case, my dear.
He had an odd sense of humor. I liked that about him. It worked with his accent somehow. Still, I didn't laugh. He wasn't German either, but used various languages at times, and wouldn't tell me where he was from. Somewhere east, I think I could gather. Though I called him Monsieur once when we were talking about France, and it stuck.
Monsieur, how many languages do you speak again?
So, what do I do, if you wonder? I have trained myself not to think. But that is perhaps a gift of not seeing. I sense all the time. And in those senses I'm like in a waking dream. A young person smelling of sauerkraut and a bitter ale, and I'm taken over to Bavaria, or you, although I have not been to America. You smell of... but never you mind.
I repeated my question.
I do not know. I do not know anymore. I speak English in my head even, when it rattles like a dead bird in an old cage, you know. Sometimes I dream in my old language, but it almost doesn't make sense anymore. How did we get rambling on about this?
Never mind.
Yes, that's right. I think that's the best approach. Exactly.
One day, he was no longer there, without a goodbye. And I mourned his departure, which was welcome, to feel tethered once more to this world. With that feeling, I almost felt enough strength to go home. But then, perhaps 6 months later, he was there again.
Are you there, my dear? You must forgive my absence. I would think it more than a nothing to you. I sometimes don't appreciate what time is to the young anymore.
We spent a week then, every night, until dawn. I read him pieces of Shakespeare and some odd poets I'd come around to in the last few weeks.
So, where did you go? If I may ask, monsieur.
I was with a friend, a very sick friend.
I'm sorry. Is he still unwell?
Not anymore. I'm glad to be back. I'm not fond of trains, and I had to take a very long one to get there. It was only a chance that I received this letter, and only chance that there was someone there to read it for me, but I had to leave as soon as I could.
I thought to ask him about why he disliked trains, but was distracted. Distracted by my newly unpredictable tears. And although I knew he could probably smell the salt, I hoped he wouldn't remark.
There is a storm coming.
I could tell by his tone that he'd be leaving again soon. Or perhaps that's what I tell myself in hindsight to keep myself safe. This time he left a rose on our bench, and I didn't wait for him to come back. Instead, I made my plans to go to France. But with that unasked question, I found myself able to write a little about why, funnily, he would dislike trains. Was it that with an open window, everything was too fast, that he couldn't place the smell? Or that the process of becoming attached and letting go was too fast for a man who lived so slow? And it was only as I kept imagining him on the train, his cane leaning there, and the way I never saw him eat anything, nor he me, of course, and how he'd give just the almost imperceptible spasm that a certain kind of man, tall and long-necked and understandably attractive to our kind, that I realized that I'd known all along, and most likely he had as well. And how nice that we were friends without even once having to utter such a truth to each other, that our conversation orbited around that secret pain without even acknowledging its pull even once. I stopped writing, and only as I turned to my text of Hamlet, looking for Monsieur's favorite speech, I realized I'd never asked his name, and he'd never asked mine, you know. And I realized that I had been writing without thinking, without judging, unconnected to what I soon realized was shame. Layered shame, a tiramisu of shame, which was a dessert I'd only discover after I'd left. I opened the passage and read out loud, "I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises. And indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory, this most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire, why it appears no other thing to me but a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, no, nor woman neither. By your smiling, you seem to say so. To which he'd reply,
But I am smiling, my dear. But man delights not me, but you do, my dear. You do.